Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Larry Earl here with NAOHP Presents and Michael Stack with Amaxx. I'll give more of an intro in just a moment. So this is the Workers' Comp Mastery, or the CWIMP course, the Certified Workers' Comp Injury Management Professional course. This is the introductory session for that. So just so you know, you're in the right place. If you could just please give me just a shout in the chat. I know a couple people had some trouble getting in. Gwen, I think, had an issue, but I think you're here. So if you could just give me a shout in the chat box and let me know that you can hear us and see us okay, and that everything is actually working, or give me one of those little emojis, whatever. Are you able to? Yeah, okay, there you go. Shauna's here. Let's see, Gwen, do you want to check in? I wanted to make sure that you were able to get in. I think I see you here. Let's see. Did I see Gwen? I see Gwen and Andrea. Well, I see Gwen. Maybe you can chime in. Bree's here. Nate, Michelle, bunch of folks. Thanks for stopping in. Yeah, just give me a shout in the chat box and make sure that we're audible and seeable. Appreciate it. And otherwise, while you're doing that, again, welcome to today's session. And I'm sort of background here. I'm really pleased to welcome Michael Stack to lead this, the founder of Amaxx. Michael has been, gosh, I don't know, doing this for decades, right, Michael? 2 or 3 decades now, right? Helping employers understand what actually drives workers' comp costs, and more importantly, what changes outcomes for injured workers, right? That's what this is all about. He's worked with organizations across the country, built this workers' comp mastery program, and is known for translating complex claims issues into clear, practical strategies. That's what we did with the last session. That's what we're going to do with the next session. And what's really especially relevant for this group, I think, is that Michael really understands what employers expect from occupational health providers. So it's a good play interface so that we can all get on the same page. And in the last cohort that we had going through this, we had some folks who were really from both sides. We had providers, we had folks who were providers inside employer clinics, and we had some folks who were predominantly on the HR safety side who were responsible for taking care of their own workers. So it really serves a common purpose to get everyone together on the same page. So today's session is really the foundation for this joint NAOHP and Amaxx certification. And again, no better person to kick that off than Michael Stack. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Earl. So excited to be here, kicking off our second class. So our first class was awesome. It was really exciting, everything that Dr. Earl described there in the intro as far as the employer medical provider relationship and just how powerful it is. It's such an exciting thing to be intentional about when you take a class like we have here, and we went through the course and we did our 6 weeks. And as Dr. Earl said, you've got providers, employers, you've got people that are on site within the employers where that partnership relationship is very tight because you're hands-on the employees, and just really being intentional about that relationship is very exciting from a work comp standpoint, because as you said in the intro, what actually works in the work comp system, and I know providers on here will certainly agree with me, is that when you're intentional about getting people back to work, when you care for people well, when you respond well, when you have clear expectations on both sides from the employer and the provider, everything works a lot smoother, and you can have very successful outcomes when you're really intentional about that partnership. And that's what this certification is all about. That's what the Amaxx NAOHP partnership is. It's why we've come together, because the NAOHP ideals and the Amaxx ideals very much align. And when you bring those two parties together, it creates very successful outcomes. And we saw that most certainly in our last class, and excited to continue that in this class where we really be intentional about those relationships. So thanks for the intro. I'm excited to get started and introduce the second class here. So today what we're going to be doing is really giving an overview of what that foundation is in terms of those cost drivers. So I'm going to be walking you through kind of what that looks like, really what we'll be covering in the class from a grander scope. And so you can kind of walk away from this session really with a pretty good foundation of what are those cost drivers, what does that scope generally look like? And then as we will be going through the class, we'll be talking about kind of breaking those things down in more detail. But today you'll get a very solid overview of what those cost drivers are, how you really be intentional about building out this relationship. So I'll go ahead and jump right in, and I'm going to share the PDF here so that you can see the overview of what we're going to be talking about.
Okay, let's see. Gwen is having some issues.
Can't see or hear
Let's see
anything.
here. I'm just going to check with Gwen here. I think she's still having some issues.
Yeah, it looks like audio and visual issues.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully that can get worked out. If anyone else, I know Andrea, you had said that you can see and hear us. So hopefully that's true for other people as well. If there's reason to pause, we can pause. Well, I'll keep moving, and if we have to back up or run into some other issues, then okay, Bree, you can see and hear. Okay, great. So hopefully it's an isolated issue, and Gwen, you can get that resolved as quick as we can. So I'll keep moving here, and I'll talk about really diving into the content of today's session. So evolution of occupational medicine. So this is really, as we've described, it's about this partnership relationship. And as we look at, and as I've come to working with NAOHP over the last couple of years, really understanding the Occ Health business side of things. How do you differentiate as an Occ Health provider? How do you really grow revenue by being intentional about these employer relationships? And it's just like anything, the more value that you add, the more business you're going to be able to drive, the more you're going to be able to retain customers as well as grow those relationships. So this is about really maximizing value. So maximizing value, creating better outcomes, becoming ultimately a better strategic business partner to those employer clients. And that's really what the overall goal is from the occupational health side. From the employer side, it's about understanding how do you interact more successfully and communicate more successfully with your occupational health providers so that you can assist them in being better strategic business partners. So both sides, really, how do you come together with this partnership and be intentional about it? So a couple of things that we're going to be doing. We're going to be talking about data from one side, but we're also going to be talking about systems. And so how do we uncover what these cost drivers are? We're going to be leveraging data, and we're going to also be talking about what that overall system outcome looks like. So here's kind of the three main points of today's discussion. We're going to be talking about this three-part framework. And so the three-part framework is how do you go about taking a program from an average program, this is from an employer perspective, from an average employer work comp management program to what would be considered a best-in-class program. Now, whichever perspective you're looking at, from the employer side or from the Occ Health side, it's about understanding this workflow. Now, either you're doing it as an employer yourself, where you're saying, all right, I'm here at point A. I want to get over here to point B, a better program. I want to have more control. I want to have less frustration. I want to be getting people back to work in a faster fashion, creating better work comp outcomes. Understanding where you are in that framework, we'll be talking about today. Point number two, then we're going to be talking about critical metrics that drive employer value. So that's about what does the data tell us? And so as you go through the first part of this, you'll understand kind of where you are. And today you should walk away with some takeaways of, oh, I can see where we are. Maybe there's some low-hanging fruit. There's some gaps that just immediately pop off the page for you that you're like, oh yeah, I want to focus on that just intuitively because you know your program. Or if you're thinking about it from an Occ Health side, one of your key clients, one of your important clients, we're like, oh, yeah, we've been working with them. I know we only get about 20 or 25% of their business, which is still a decent amount of business. We'd love if we can bump that up to 30%, 40%, 50% or greater of their injury business. So really understanding how can you identify those cost drivers within those employer clients to, again, be that better strategic partner. And then the third part we'll be talking about today is just turning these insights. So whether it's coming from data or it's coming from intuitively, knowing where to focus, how do you make it actionable? And that's such a big part of what we're covering in this certification course, is making this information super actionable, where we've got very hands-on tools, we've got scripts, we've got templates, we've got various tools that can be put into practice in order to make these things a reality. So that's our overview, and feel free to shout out questions, shout out comments, certainly as we go through today's course. We want to make it as interactive as possible, and hopefully those technical issues do get worked out. Okay, so again, goal today, leveraging workers' comp as a platform to grow health business success. That's creating better employer relationships, becoming a better strategic business partner. All right, so here we go. Let's dive into, and I'm going to zoom in on this because it looks like a lot out of the gates. And it is a lot. The thing about work comp is there are a lot of moving parts, and it becomes and can be a very complex system. A lot of different stakeholders, a lot of emotion involved, a lot of moving parts, a lot of data that you've got to try to organize and make good decisions on. And so part of being a really good business partner to employer clients, or as an employer yourself, is being able to simplify and be able to take kind of very intentional steps in a sequential way that are going to lead you from point A to point B. So that's what this little map kind of describes. Average is over here at point A. You might be currently above average, you might be below average, but wherever you are at point A, it's over here at point B, which is your best-in-class program. So how do you get there? How do you get there from here? What is the map? What is the Google Maps, kind of showing us as far as what those steps are? So let's dive into this a little bit, and I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to show you what these steps are. And again, your goal from today, just from today's session, is going to be what is jumping out at you as far as, oh, I know we've got an issue there. I know that's kind of a problem there. And what I want you to think about as we're kind of going through this is not always, and I'll tell you kind of one of the hiccups that people will often have, is they'll often always say, if there's a problem in a work comp program, it'll often typically blame the TPA or carrier, the claims administrator. They'll blame the adjusters. The adjusters are overworked. They've got too much of a caseload. They're not responding to us in time. It's just, it's a major issue with them, or our vendor solutions, or it's our case managers, or they'll blame the doctors. They'll blame the occupational health physicians. They're not releasing our employees to work in time, etc. That's oftentimes where the first place that people will go in terms of really putting this into practice. Now, why that's an error is because oftentimes the problem starts over here. It's more in a very reactionary type program from an employer perspective. And if you are one of these health providers, I think that you'll agree with me that when you say, if an employer could care less about their work comp program, they don't treat their employees well, they don't communicate well, they never respond to us, we can't get a hold of anybody over there. If the employer is not participating, an active participant in this process, it becomes very difficult from a claims perspective or from a medical provider perspective in order to achieve those positive outcomes. So when we look at what are the first steps in this, the first steps start over here in the framework. And also, as we're laying this out, you're also going to be seeing what we're covering over the 6-week course timeframe. So in the first course, in the first week, we cover this step-by-step process to master work comp. So we go through this 3-part framework in much more detail, and then we give out the handouts, the templates are what are your goals for the program. So what are your goals for the program? That's where oftentimes people will miss that. Okay, what are we trying to accomplish? Where are we focusing? Number 2 is creating an employee brochure. So that starts to put these assets together, these assets to say, okay, we want to implement these best practices. What are our assets? What is our process that we can make repeatable for a large organization, so a large employer organization, or multiple clients if you're a occ health provider? How do we systematize this thing? So, okay, we've got 50,000 employees, we've got 10,000 employees, we've got 80,000 employees, we've got 10 locations or 100 locations or 1,500 locations, or I've got one client or two clients or 50 clients or 1,000 clients. How do I systematize this that can be applicable across all the different states? Okay, we've got Ohio is monopolistic. We've got a whole bunch of other states. We've got Texas is an opt-out state. We've got a lot of different state laws. We've got California has its own, some of its own little wrinkles, and New York has its own little wrinkles, and all these different states all across the country. So how do we make a system that's going to apply to all these different clients in all these different states and make this very repeatable, very systematic, and very predictable as far as what is the outcome for injured workers' comp claims? So when somebody gets injured, what happens? What is the goal? What are we trying to accomplish? And that's what that's what we're talking about in terms of this framework, this three-part framework. So the first part, as I said, it's about building out your assets, figuring out where you are now. So what are our goals? Who's on board? Who's the team that's managing it? What does our brand look like? Is there any kind of a brand? Is it identifiable? So Coca-Cola, FedEx, Walmart, all the very proven brands, very recognizable names, they stand for something. What does that mean for your client or for your organization? So that's the framework. That's kind of part one of the process. Next piece is you get into the employer controls. So as I said, most people oftentimes jump to this one, the external controls, as the problem area or the biggest area or the biggest reason they're having challenges or struggles within their work comp programs. The main area, oftentimes, that can make major improvements very quickly is putting these employer controls in place. So what are your hiring practices? What does that look like? Are people that are being hired, so you have a lot of turnover, or you have seasonal workers, or you're just hiring a bunch of people and they're getting hurt right away? What is the training? What is the hiring practices? Are people set up for success, or are they set up for failure? So that's taking a look at those hiring practices. So this injury prevention culture, so that's a lot of the safety programs, that's the wellness programs, that's a lot of the total worker health programs, where you look at how do we prevent injuries from happening? And that can all be a part of the hiring program. That's all a part of the overall wellness and total worker health of your workforce. The healthier people are, the less likely they're going to get injured and the faster they're going to recover. So that's a whole part of that process when you look at those employer controls. Next piece here is your post-injury systems. So that's your injury response systems, that's your communication with injured workers, that's your return to work programs. So how do those programs, when somebody gets hurt, what happens? And that's that bulletproof post-injury response. That's accident investigation, communication, return to work, putting these systems in place at the employer so you have consistency across multiple states, across multiple clients of what's going to happen. Again, a lot of this is all about expectation setting. It's about policy setting. It's about setting systems in place from a high level. So when you look at the high level and you say, well, this is how we do it here, how are we going to have all these different locations nationwide following the same thing? How are we going to work with these customers all following a similar protocol when they're all in different states and there's all kinds of different stuff going on? How do we make this simple for everybody? And that's a lot what these post-injury systems are all about. So as you're listening today and you're thinking about one of the takeaways that I'd love for you to pull out for yourself in this first little session here is what is standing out to you. So as I'm talking about these things, do you have clear defined goals? Do you have a brand and logo? Do you understand what some of the main cost drivers are for your programs? How are these systems currently working for you as an employer? Or if you are a service provider, do you understand what these things are at your employer clients' organizations? Do you understand what they are? Do you have a interaction with them, a communication with them at this level? And a lot of times this is about moving from that transactional level where it's like, okay, my shoulders hurt. Oh, all right, I can't lift anymore. All right, I can't go into work. You know, I've got to lift boxes all day. I can't use this left shoulder very well. And you treat my shoulder and we go into a rehab program, and I'm going to PT, and that's great. And I need surgery, and you do the surgery, and that's awesome. It just becomes very transactional, and now I'm back to work at some point. Versus working with that employer at this higher strategic level to say, let's look at how injuries are handled. How can we be better partners to you, Mr. Employer Client? Let's take a look at these things and understand what is driving these costs. So it's very much changing the conversation from a transactional shoulder or hip or back or knee to a strategic level where you're really talking about how you partner better together. How do we partner better together in injury prevention? How do we have, okay, we've got services here at our health system. We've got a biometrics tool. We've got wellness programs. We've got injury prevention. We do functional job descriptions. We do various different services that can help with these things when you're understanding what these main cost drivers are, and then focusing on the return to work. So we'll be talking a little bit later today about what some of these key metrics are, what they look like, and how this actually looks in a black and white scenario. So this first piece, this first point today is talking about conceptually what these things look like. We'll be drilling down a little bit deeper into what does this actually look like from a concrete standpoint in terms of numbers and cost drivers. So we'll be talking about that here next. So last piece here is the external controls. And as I said, this is oftentimes where the first place where people will go. They say, it's my occ health provider, they're a total disaster. It's my claims administrators, it's my investigators, it's my case managers, it's somebody besides me as the employer. That's the problem here. If I just switched TPAs, then I'll be in great shape. And that's oftentimes not the case in terms of how this is set up. So what this piece is all about is about being intentional about those relationships. So big part of the first part of our class is about setting policies and about setting expectations. So one of the things that we'll work on is a medical provider brochure, and we'll also work on a transitional duty policy. And so when you're laying out these transitional duty policies, okay, here's how we do it here at the Acme company. We have a return to work program. This is what it means. This is how we go about it, etc. We have an employee brochure. We're communicating with our injured workers after post-injury response. We set expectations as far as what we expect of them and what they expect of us in terms of injury response. Same thing with our medical providers and our medical provider brochure. So we have, and we've worked with Larry at NAOHP, and we have that medical provider sort of understanding. So when you set it, an engagement letter. So we set that up. Okay, what does that look like in terms of how this relationship is designed? Okay, this is what happens. Or this is how much our services are offering, and this is how we're going to work together. Just being intentional, and there's different versions of that. There's different ways to go about that. But the idea is just being intentional about the relationship. This is how we're going to work together. This is what success means for us. This is how we expect of you, what you expect of us in terms of that relationship. Same idea in terms of the injured workers, in terms of the external controls as we set this up. So just very quickly, give yourself a little kind of mental check mark. How are we doing in each one of these kind of major buckets? Do we have goals? Do we understand what some of our gaps are? How is our hiring practices, our injury prevention, our post-injury systems? And then how are we intentional about our external controls relationships? A lot of times there's gaps here, there's low-hanging fruit, there's things that stand out to people really right out of the gates as we start to go through this. All right, so this is this next slide is this is just the details of each one of these. So as I said, these kind of drill down into little details of each section. So as you identify the major buckets, then you can drill down into some of those smaller buckets. All right, let me zoom this back out. Anything else to add there, Dr. Earl, on that process in terms of just overall before we move into this next section?
No, I mean, I think you pretty much nailed it. I don't have anything to add to that.
Yeah, great. And as you see, what was exciting when we went through that last class, and I think you'll agree, is seeing this really come to life. This whole process of how people work through it. It was really exciting to me from the employer side, and watching that medical relationship. I'm sure that came to life for you as well.
It did. Yeah, absolutely. I think that group was, again, interesting because we had, really diverse perspectives on it. from complete provider to an in-house clinic provider to the safety HR professional view, and how everyone really was on the same page by the end of the course. That, you know, we're all, again, all speaking the same language. That's the whole thing we've been talking about, communication, in these last several weeks, actually. That's where it all comes together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was really it is really wild when you take these different roles, different different goals, generally not different goals in the sense of I focus on Occ Health or I focus on employer systems. It's ultimately the same goal when you come together and really make it really come to life. And just the synergy was very strong. The cooperation was very strong. The sharing of ideas was really strong, and getting the perspective of the other side is extraordinarily helpful, I think, for both sides. So that was really impactful and
Yeah,
exciting to see come alive.
I think something else that comes out just in a lot of these discussions is, you know, it's not the old stigma of being the company doctor. Um, it's really doing the right thing for the patient is what turns out to be the best for everybody. You know,
Yeah.
when you truly do the right thing for the patient, which means that they're not going to sit around at home on the couch watching lawyer commercials. That's not the right thing for the patient, you know, just to have time off for any old injury. That's clearly not the right thing. It doesn't help them get better faster. So taking this very proactive approach and keeping people moving and keeping them active, having them participate in their care is being the company doctor. It's not, you know, telling them what to do or, you know, being punitive at all. It's not about that at all. And I think, you know, as we get through these discussions, you see that more and more, that do the right thing for the patient, you're going to have a better outcome.
Yeah, 1000%. And it just all why it's so exciting and why it works together so well is because of what you just said there. It's do the right thing for the patient, and it works great for everybody. The employers say, "Oh, this clinic, this medical provider is in line with my goals. We're on the same page. They want to help me, and by helping my employees, and by helping my employees, it helps me, and by having everyone work together, it creates better profits and creates better ROI. It saves me costs and saves everybody. Ultimately, it comes out with a better outcome." And that's why it's so awesome, because it's like, oh, that's great. Do the right thing, help people, do a really good job. That health business grows. The work comp costs at the employer go down. They want to do more injury prevention services, driving up employer paid services, and it just all works together in a very harmonious way. So it's really it's super cool when you see it come together. All right, so let's continue. Let's continue on. Let's just talk more specifically, because I think that's a nice ideal. That sounds great. It's like, oh yeah, that sounds really nice. That sounds like an idealistic approach. That sounds amazing. Okay, great. What does that actually mean in practice? And so let's talk about what that really means in practice and how we go about doing that. And so the first part was what we just talked about. So that's the 3-part framework. So that's where you start to take that ideal and you say, okay, how do we better partner with our employers? How do we do the right thing that feels really good, and it grows business, and it's better for the workers, and it's better for the employer? Okay, that's awesome. How do we go about doing that in practice? So that was we talked about the general framework. So now we're going to talk about actually what this means in terms of cost drivers for employers. I have on the screen here what is an employer's loss run. So this is a sample loss run. I'm just going to zoom in. And a lot of medical providers may have seen these, may have not seen these. We've seen both, where you're saying, I'm very familiar with that, or I'm not familiar with it at all. I've never actually seen an employer's loss run. And all this does is that lists out the cost per claim and all the data associated with each claim from the TPA or the carrier. So what type of claim was it? Where did it happen? What was the claim ID? What was the body part that happened? What was the injury type? What was the cause? And what were the costs of each claim? So what were the medical costs? What were the indemnity or the wage loss costs? What were the total costs? This is a pretty good way for a medical provider to have a link to the costs. And so when you say, hey, well, the best thing, what Dr. Earl just said, the best thing is actually just doing the best thing for the patient. Okay, that's great. That's awesome. That sounds awesome. Show me the money type of thing. Particularly if you're working with a very financially driven employer, show me the money. Why is it I'd rather just go to the concentric clinic? They're giving me a discounted rate from the network. So, well, that just makes a lot of sense. I'm just going to go there so I can just pay as low as amount that I possibly can, yeah, from a network discount. And we all know that that doesn't drive positive outcomes. It's not good for the occupational health providers. It's not great for the injured workers, or not great for the injured workers, not great for the employers, because it ends up just being not a great situation. When you talk about how do we have a full value provider relationship, it's saying, hey, we're going to do the best thing for your patient, and maybe you're going to pay a little bit more, but in the back end, you're going to be saving a huge amount. And this is how we tell that story from a financial perspective. It's not just pie in the sky stuff. It doesn't just sound really nice on paper. It actually means something from a financial perspective. So that's what the loss run does. And it's just a tool that we have in our toolbox in order to be able to drive and understand what these cost drivers are. As I said, being a true partner to your employer clients. Let's take a look at what these cost drivers are. And again, from a strategic perspective, it's about changing the game from a transactional relationship to this strategic relationship. And here's what this cost driver matrix actually looks like. So at the top here is your total costs. So your total cost, your cost per full-time equivalent employee. We can talk more about what that means, but basically it just is your total cost. And so what is the cost for an organization? And it can vary obviously by the size of the organization. That's why the cost per full-time equivalent employee comes in. But generally, what is your overall cost for your program? And there's two major drivers. So two major drivers, and we talked about these already. So these probably aren't going to be a surprise because they're very basic, is either the frequency of claims. So the number of claims you're having is your major driver. You're having a lot of claims, or your cost per claim, your severity of your claims is higher. So pull one or both of these levers, and your costs are going to be impacted. If you start having more frequency of claims, more recordables, more claims, your costs are going to go up generally. If you have more severe claims, so even if you just have one or two or three claims, but they're $100,000, $200,000, $500,000, $1 million claims, your overall costs are going to be very high because they're very severe claims. So when you start to position very simply from a strategic partner relationship as an employer and the provider, just being on the same page with what does success look like? So what does success look like for us? Doing the right thing for patients drives down the cost per claim because of these drivers below here. We're getting our claims reported timely. So we're building that trust that as soon as an accident happens with the employer has good systems to drive down their lag time. So we've got good communication. We've got good systems in order to report the claim. And shocker, the quicker that an injured worker gets to see the medical provider, I'm sure every medical provider would agree, is the more likely you can resolve that claim very quickly. You know, just a small shoulder injury that gets taken care of right away versus gets worse and worse over time. And now it's been a week, it's been 2 weeks, it's been 3 weeks, it's gotten worse. They've continued to use it. They haven't gotten the treatment they need. That's just going to be a significantly more severe injury than it has to be. So getting that injury reported quickly, getting the people back to work quickly is some major drivers. And we'll be talking about this in the insight section here today, that the medical providers can have a very significant impact on. The other piece, when we look at this from a prospecting perspective or a new client perspective, as you're starting to engage in this different kind of conversation, in this business partner type of conversation versus the transactional conversation, is saying, where are you now, Mr. Employer Client? What are some of the biggest areas of cost drivers for you that we can better support you in? And it's having that relationship, having that engagement. We work with some occupational health clinics, and we work with them on this. And they've had these conversations, and it's just an entirely different conversation. It's an entirely different conversation when you're talking about, all right, let's look at your return to work rates. How can we better support you? All right, well, what do we need as a clinic? All right, we need the people to get to us quickly. We need good job descriptions, good functional job descriptions. We need engagement from the supervisors. We need communication, be able to connect those dots. All right, great. Now we put those systems in place. We work together as a partnership. And shocker, things get better when you're being intentional about it. So that's understanding what some of those major cost drivers are. I call this the 5 critical metrics. And so here's what, as you start to look at these. The other piece that on the frequency side, and I know that NAOHP does a lot of training on this as far as what is and what is not a recordable injury. So how do you reduce recordable rates within an employer? There's several things, obviously, that the occupational health provider can be intentional about. It's prescriptions, type of treatments, etc. NAOHP does great training on that. Being intentional about driving down these recordables, and from a total worker health standpoint, driving down overall claims. That's where those employer systems that we talked about earlier start to come out in terms of numbers. When you're saying, what are some areas for us to focus on as a partnership? Where do we see low-hanging fruit? And this, again, could be from a formal data analysis where you're looking at the loss run data. It could be just conversational, because a lot of times the employer will know, hey, these are some things that are really, I'm seeing, I'm in the weeds every day. I'm seeing this stuff happening all the time. You know, we just have a ton of injuries over here. You know, our Southeast division, that location is a really problem spot for us. Okay, let's talk about how we can resolve some of those things. So it's either data driven, if you're having that level of conversation with them, you're just also understanding what are these areas of focus and where can we as a provider be that better partner. So that's the cost driver matrix. It's frequency, it's severity. The next piece of this is it drills down a little bit deeper into what are the drivers of the drivers. So these are the primary drivers and these are the secondary drivers. Now, as you look at this screen, you'll say, whoa, that's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of different boxes on here. And the point is, yes, there are a lot of different boxes on here, because this is what the employer clients are dealing with. This is what the employers have a lot of stuff going on. So the more that the medical providers can understand, where do they show up? Where do you show up as a medical provider on this list? Where can you impact these 5 critical metrics? What does your role do that's going to help your employer client overall reduce your costs? And then that ideal that Dr. Earl described earlier of let's do the right thing for the patient. Okay, that sounds awesome. That sounds like a great thing. What does that really mean then? Where do we put our energy? What does that mean in practice for you, Mr. Employer Client, in terms of doing the right thing for the patient and overall doing the right thing for the employer company? Where can we have the most impact? So it's not about necessarily mastering every one of these boxes. It's that knowing that they exist. Knowing the more you know as a provider what the employer is dealing with, it's the more you can have those conversations from a prospecting perspective or from a current client perspective, where you're having a quarterly business review, you're having an annual stewardship meeting to say, what are some of our major challenges that we're dealing with here, and how do we better solve those? So whether you're looking at major drivers of number of claims, so it's particular jobs, it's particular locations, it's employee turnover, it's health and wellness, it's job descriptions, post-offer employment testing, various tactics and systems and strategies you can implement that are going to impact those things. Or you're going down the line in any one of these other major categories: return to work rates for your indemnity, your lag time, or impacting litigation or large loss claims rates. So that's kind of your overall metrics. And now I want to dive into what this really means. What does this mean? So we've talked about the overall framework. We talked about the metrics piece. We talked about the critical metrics, what that cost driver matrix looks like. Now, what does this actually look like in terms of actionable solutions? As I said, the most exciting and the most valuable part of what we're doing in this certification course is making this stuff come to life, making it actionable, giving you tools, giving you tactics, giving you systems, giving you a very clear roadmap, whether you're an employer directly or you're the provider working with the employer, putting these best practices actually into practice. It's a huge piece of what we're doing in the course. So here's the overall kind of objective. That strategic business partner relationship starts with asking questions and engagement. It starts with a conversation. What are the client's goals? So we talked about that at the beginning of this session today. First question was, what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? We have a framework for what that looks like. So taking the client, if the client doesn't have clear goals, here are some questions that we can ask. Here are how we can kind of flush that out, understanding where they are. What are you trying to accomplish in terms of this conversation? And I've seen this in practice. It works famously well. The value of the conversation is often having the conversation. Let's have this engagement. We have a framework to talk about. Let's have this discussion and open up how we can be better partners to you. Because Concentra is not having these conversations most of the time. They're not being intentional about this. It's just a discount model, a factory model. We're cranking through these. How do you differentiate in a marketplace? You have the conversations, you engage in a relationship. All right, so let me take it back here. This is just a little refresher on what that cost driver matrix is. Now, where does the medical provider really start to shine in terms of taking action? 3 primary areas that the OpHealth area is going to make an impact. The claims rate, so that's the frequency. So that's the health and wellness. That's focusing on injury prevention. That's could be stretch and flex programs. It could be various things. They're going to impact recordables. They're going to impact overall claims by having a better process in place. Second piece is your indemnity rate. So that's your return to work rates. And that's a major impact on an employer's program by getting people back to work faster. So I do a great training on this with one of our courses that we cover within the certification is the best practices, definitive guide to return to work best practices. So going through this ACON, the American College of Occupational Environmental Medicine, many people are familiar with that organization. Their 3-part framework. What does that actually look like? How do you make this consistently applied across multiple different states and multiple different employers going through this process to get people back to work very quickly? So we'll be talking about that framework. We talk about the transitional duty policy. We talk about job descriptions, having that systematically in place, and then also training your supervisors. So supervisors, managers, HR people, operations folks, the people that are actually engaging in this. Because one of the things that came up a lot and came up in this conversation I had earlier today is we're a large organization. You know, we've got 1,500 locations. We're in 40 different states. You know, a big challenge that we have is you as the person that's in charge, that's coming to the course. Okay, you get it. You're like, yes, that makes sense to me. I understand this. I'm ready to implement it, but I've got XYZ challenge. I've got a big organization. I'm trying to get people on board. I run into issues, blah, blah, blah. I have roadblocks here or there, working through those things. And so that's a lot where that discussion comes into play, and it's hugely valuable. It's really engaging for me to participate in as well. It's really fun to participate in when you talk about sharing ideas and you talk about, hey, we're doing this and this is how we overcame that. And what do you guys think about that? And really having that mastermind discussion is just, it's very entertaining and engaging. One of the things that we do when we end the course is we have what's called an exhibition of learning. So in that exhibition of learning, you talk about, okay, here's what I learned and here's what I'm doing with it. And that was just so, it was just so fun. And I know, Dr. O, you'll agree with me. We could have been there for hours, just listening to people talking through, people were talking about, oh, that's great. And just really encouraging and sharing ideas with people. It was really an entertaining exhibition where you see this information come to life in terms of what does this look like in your organizations. So that's a big area of focus in the indemnity rate. The third piece there is your large loss claims rate. So when we talk about large loss claims, these are the claims that are the most severe. And so this is the 5% of claims that account for 80% of costs. So this is the very severe claims where you're $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 claims and up. The marker that I put for this claims rate is $50,000. So anything over $50,000 is considered in terms of how I do the metrics, a large loss claim. And so where do these impact, where does the impact of an OpHealth provider have on these? Most of these, and I'm sure that many of the OpHealth providers will agree with me, It's not that it was a majorly severe injury. Those certainly happen. Those catastrophic claims happen. They're very unfortunate. The traumatic brain injury, there's spinal cords, etc. But most of the time, or a big chunk of the time, in fact, the stats say it's 2/3 of the time. The NCCI did a study on this. It was 2/3 of the claims that were $1 million or greater started off as routine injuries. So routine backs, routine hips, routine shoulders, routine knees end up costing $1 million or more. And a lot of times these people will never return to work ever again. And that's just unfortunate because a shoulder injury shouldn't keep you out. A minor shoulder injury that we know how to treat, it should only be out of work for a limited period of time, but it ends up being this majorly expensive claim. And that's where a lot of that communication comes into play, a lot of the frameworks that we talk about in terms of building trust, getting people back to work, having that dynamic and that partnership, that doing the right thing for the patient can be a major impact. And so when you talk about how does that strategic business partnership between an health provider and an employer, where does it show up? It's showing up in the data in these three primary areas: reducing claims, getting people back to work quicker, reducing those large loss claims as well. Oh, I lost my slides. There we go. We got them back. Okay. This is just a little bit more information on what the claims rate is, what the large loss claims rates are, and kind of a summary. And I wanted to leave a few minutes to talk about what the course actually looks like. Any questions on it? But that's kind of covers the basic framework of what we're going to be talking about. We're talking about understanding the frameworks. We're talking about what the cost drivers are and how do you position your occupational health and employer relationship as that strategic business partner relationship. Anything to add there, Dr. Earl? And I'll pull up our course outline of what that looks like and what we'll be covering.
Yeah, you're still doing good. I'm mostly muted because I'm coughing today. So no, you're doing good.
All right, great. Was there any questions that people wanted to pop out while I'm getting this pulled up?
Yeah, I think those 5 metrics are key. We keep talking about those, bringing those up consistently, and those are really the things I think that we focus on, in the full course. It's very, like you said, it's very intentional. What's driving costs, and you can specifically attack each one of those things, and I think in the evaluation process, you're looking at where, which ones of those are the outliers for a particular company. So you don't always have to attack all 5 areas in every single company, but you're going to see where the problem child is, and that's where you're going to focus your efforts.
And I think that's a great point, because I think it can be really overwhelming for people,
Right.
for employers and providers alike, when you look at an outline like that and you say, well, wow, there's a lot of boxes here. There's a lot of stuff going on. We can't tackle that all at once. And that's 100% correct. You can't tackle it all at once. Is how do you create an intentional plan where you take step one? So you can see on here, the logo of our company is an elephant. Because of, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. And that's the logo of our Amaxx company. That's the process, and that's never going to change in terms of how it works, because particularly for large companies, medium-sized to larger employers, working with multiple employer clients, you can't tackle it all at once. There's just too many moving parts, but you can be intentional and you can take step one in order to get things under wraps. And that's what we really work on throughout the course of this: is how do you identify step one? Where is the biggest bang for your buck, if you will, in terms of overall program implementation. So here's the outline, and I want to give you the outline of what we cover kind of in the 6-week course. And you'll see that this outline very much tracks everything that we've talked about today. Is how do you go from that 3-part framework? We talk about how do you understand the 5 critical metrics, and you don't understand that all at once. Today, hopefully you've pulled out a couple of different things, and that's the goal for today, is to say, what is, just off of your mind and anecdotally, these are some things that I can focus on and then we drill down a little bit deeper into understanding that. So that's what we do in the course. So here's week one. So week one is really understanding what the foundation is. So I talked about in the first part of that is establishing your program goals, doing a little systems assessment as far as what's some of the low-hanging fruit. So we have a little 20-question little assessment that you would go through, or you would go through and leveraging with your customers. We go through the work comp foundation. So that covers who are the stakeholders, who are all the different players, what does this look like? The step-by-step course goes through that 3-part framework in more detail. So how do you go from average to best in class? So that's that first week. Now the rhythm of the course is assigning 1 or 2 classes, typically around 2 classes per week. So there's an on-demand, bless you. So there's an on-demand course library that I have. So I'll assign the courses. You'll get a username and password for our online course curriculum, for our work comp mastery training curriculum. So you'll get that. And then you'll go in and you'll take the on-demand courses. So it's kind of the idea of, we don't need to spend an hour together lecturing. The value of coming together is actually having the discussion of what does this mean in practice. So the rhythm of the course is you'll take these 2 courses, you'll have the hands-on deliverables, and then you'll come to the discussion kind of ready to discuss and say, all right, I took that step-by-step course and I started going through my goals or my systems assessment, and this kind of made sense, or it didn't make sense, or I went through this and this kind of stood out to me, or here's what I'm looking to accomplish. And then you hear what other people are looking to accomplish, and you're able to kind of build off of that and have a lot of that synergy. So you take the on-demand courses, which is the lecture part of the course, and then the discussion happens on our weekly basis. So week 2, we dive into starting to get into the employer systems. So this is basically the framework. So if you go back to our 3-part framework that I talked about earlier, that's week 1 as we start the framework, where it's the goals, who are the players, kind of understanding where you're at as an organization. So we start to build that. Number 2, week 2, is we get into this communication and return to work. So that's getting into the employer systems. And as I said, one of the really most valuable parts, well, 2 of the most valuable parts, is one is the discussion is incredibly valuable. The second is the tangible takeaways, where we say, what is, you need to have an employer brochure. Okay, great. An employer brochure, sounds great, but where do I start? I've got a million other things I'm doing. I'm juggling all kinds of balls. Where do I start? And so we give you the template framework in order to start that. Shawnee, you asked what day and time of the week is the discussion. So typically Mondays, 4:00 Eastern is when we had been doing them. And that was our plan moving forward. Unless the people that join up in the class, there's a major objection to that, then we can obviously try to accommodate. But that's been what we had been planning on, and that worked pretty well in the past. So as I said, so second week there is really building out those employer controls. So it's transitional duty policy, the employee wallet card, get well card, the return to work framework, setting these things up where you're starting to set expectations. So much of a lot of what we're doing is that setting expectations between the employer and employee, between the medical provider and the employer, between the employer and the claims handling organization. So setting that framework of expectations of what that looks like. We'll move along a little bit further, getting into now, how do you scale this out across an organization? So supervisor training, the use of investigation techniques, and avoiding litigation. So this is that supervisor training template. So how do you scale out to multiple location organization in multiple states? That's what we'll be covering primarily in this course, which is, again, employer systems. Week number 4, we get into actually diving into what the metrics mean. So we'll be looking at your loss run data or your client's loss run data and starting to understand, okay, here's the 5 critical metrics. If you're looking at this from a client perspective, here's some low-hanging fruit. So you've gone through some assessment tools, you've got the data tools now to take this data-driven approach to actually really adding value to your client relationships. And then the last piece of this is really those external providers. So that's the medical provider brochures, that's the medical provider engagement letter, that's the working with account handling instructions with your claims organization, setting up those external controls in order to be able to be successful with this. So that's that last week. And then I said the last week is the exhibition of learning, which is just awesome. It's just a cool, really cool experience where you go through and you talk about what do these things mean. I think there's so much data out there. There's so much AI and ChatGPT and Gemini and all kinds of stuff. But what does this really mean in practice for you at your organization with the people that you have available, with the challenges that you're seeing? What does this mean for you? And it's just a really powerful engagement to go through, to listen, to get peer feedback, and really put this information into practice at your organization. So that's the overall course is, and then there's the final exam, and that's it. And then you're certified as a certified master or certified workers' comp injury professional, and you start to really reap the benefits.
Yeah, I agree with you, Michael, on those. The practicum presentations, some of them were quite impressive and really showed how, people brought the whole course together in their own company, in their own environment, how they applied it. And yeah, that was really fun to watch.
Yeah,
how those
absolutely.
came together.
Absolutely. So we just got about 3 minutes left here. Take any
Day
other
and time of the
is there
weekly
any other
discussion
questions?
group. So the course is 4:00 on Mondays. So that'll run every week, except if there's a holiday week, then we'll skip. And then other discussion has been more ad hoc, I think. Right, Michael? We didn't have a set office hours, but we could.
Yeah, yeah, it's been
If
more
people
ad
really
hoc.
wanted to
Yeah,
do that,
absolutely.
we could do that.
I had a couple of conversations with people just casually.
More
They
ad
would
hoc,
reach
yeah.
out. Yeah, TJ reached out a few times. Heather reached out a couple times, and
Yeah.
they had a few specific questions that I was happy that we jumped on a quick call and just worked through them.
Yeah, I think because these groups are not huge, that most of the discussion is in the main session. Everyone is
Yeah.
on stage, and we're all really more of a meeting, because it's not a huge group. I think we're looking for maybe 6 to 8 people max in these
Yeah.
classes. So it's a fairly intimate group, and it's very easy to have a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the really powerful part about it is having those discussions and keeping them in small groups is just been a great strategy. Just because then people are there, you feel comfortable talking. We built really a nice little community. I think people were kind of sad, which I was too. I'm like, oh, I like seeing everybody on a weekly basis, and build some community and support. On what everyone's trying to do.
Yeah. So the link for the full outline of the course is in chat there. You probably have it in your email. And we'll send this video around if you had colleagues who were interested, but they didn't get a chance to see what the program's all about. We'll get this posted later tonight or tomorrow.
Yeah, and we're planning to start next Monday, the 2nd.
February 2nd. Yep.
February 2nd. Yep, absolutely.
All right.
So we look forward
Thank
to
you all
seeing
very
everybody
much.
there.
If there's any other questions, I don't see anything else. Shauna, thank you. Anas, thank you. Thank you all for coming. Yeah, I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
All right.
Awesome.
Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Michael.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye now.
Bye-bye.